Hi everybody, thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Bex. I'm the events coordinator here at Books Are Magic, and we are so excited to have Jessica Francis Kane and Anna Napolitano here with us to celebrate both Fonseca and A Good Hard Look. I just have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. We'll be doing a hand raised Q&A at the end of the night, so think of your questions, follow them inside. We'll try to get them answered. Afterwards, both Jessica and Anne will be signing and personalizing near where you checked in, so we'll let you know when and where to line up for that. Joining us virtually in the live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Fonseca and A Good Hard Look online. Use the link in the description. If you're here, we'd love to encourage you to buy copies here. We've got plenty for you to purchase and to give to everybody you know. And you should do that. Okay, so the books you'll be buying tonight. The first, Fonseca, follows acclaimed English author Penelope Fitzgerald's real-life journey to Mexico with her young son in search of a much-needed inheritance. With heart and humor, Fonseca is at once a fictionalization of true events and an enthralling world of its own. A Good Hard Look, our other book tonight, also fictionalizes a literary icon, setting Flannery O'Connor back to her hometown in Georgia. Literary history and fiction gracefully intersect in this emotionally charged novel and asks how we can live our lives to the fullest. Our first star of tonight's show. Sorry, I ate like a bunch of chips right before I got up, which was such a mistake. Jessica Francis Kane is the author of 6 books, including Rules for Visiting, which we also have here tonight for you to purchase. And her best-selling work has been longlisted for the Story Prize and Joyce Carol Oates Prize, and was a finalist for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. Her stories and essays have appeared just about everywhere, and she lives in New York and Connecticut. And Napolitano, our second star of tonight's show, is the New York Times bestselling author of 4 books, including Hello Beautiful, which we have here for you to purchase, and which Anne has generously pre-signed. It was the 100th selection for Oprah Winfrey's Book Club, and for 7 years, Napolitano was the associate editor of the literary magazine One Story, and she received an MFA from NYU. She's taught fiction writing at Brooklyn College, NYU, and Gotham Writers Workshop. Without any further ado, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to Jessica and Anne.
Jessica and I are happy to be here. I'm really happy to be here. I love Fonseca. I read it early, I have no idea, in the last year. We share an editor in Ginny Smith, and it's so beautifully written and so layered, and there's so many different interesting elements to it. I can't wait to discuss it. We thought we would talk about how we each sort of ended up writing about a well-known female writer, and Jessica's going to go first. I think yes. Penelope Fitzgerald is less known, right, certainly in America, than Flannery O'Connor is.
Yes. I think the funny thing about this evening is that I sort of feel like I'm opening for Anne, but Anne thinks that she's opening for me. So it's just such a nice coincidence that these books are out at the same time, because when I was trying to figure out how to write Fonseca, I turned to A Good Hard Look, not in this beautiful new edition.
A Good Hard Look came out in 2011.
It's her second novel.
Yes, so it's this is re-released. So I didn't write it recently.
Right. So it's re-released in this gorgeous new edition. So that's what we're celebrating here tonight, also with the publication of my book. So it's a lovely coincidence. But it's true. I think it's fair to say that Penelope Fitzgerald is less well known than Flannery O'Connor, although I regret that. I think that's a shame. I'm trying to bolster her literary legacy as hard as I can. But I have been explaining to audiences why it is I came to write a novel about an English novelist of last century. And I first read her work in 1999 when I was living in London with my husband. I'd left my job in publishing, and we moved to London for his job. And I was very homesick at first. I was giving myself a chance to write. My backup plan was to work in the pub if it didn't work out, but I was giving myself a window of time to write and see what I could do, but it wasn't going well. And one night my husband came home from work with a book for me. He'd stopped in a bookstore on the way home and brought me a novel he thought I might enjoy because it was set along the Thames near where we were living. And that novel was Offshore by Penelope Fitzgerald. And I read it, loved it, quickly read all of her other books, and really from that time on was telling people she was my favorite writer and would recommend her novels to anyone who would listen. And so later I learned, I think at the time I loved her writing just because her writing is so wonderful. Also, I was very inspired by the fact that she didn't publish her first novel till she was 60. So I was in my 20s trying to write, trying to, feeling like I was running out of time. But of course I wasn't. And I was so inspired by her story that she waited till she was 60 to publish her first novel. So a little bit about her, because I know she's not as well known. She was born in 1916. She went to Oxford, graduated from Somerville College, which was her mother's college. She was born into a very academic, very literary family. Her father was the editor of Punch. She had an uncle who helped crack the Enigma code during World War II. So they were very, very educated, very erudite. She expected great things of herself, and expected to write as soon as she came down from Oxford. Instead, she got married to an Irish soldier, as she said, who went off to World War II. She worked for the BBC during that time, and when he came back, they started a family and edited together a literary journal, and then really ran into financial troubles very quickly.
A
And
very prestigious literary journal, though,
yes,
right? I
very.
mean, they published
right.
like
Yes, they published Muriel Spark.
Yeah.
They published J.D. Salinger. They
Yeah.
were the first publishers of With Love. From Esme with Love.
Yes,
or
yes,
Love and
yes.
Squalor.
Oh,
Anyone? Anyone remember the name of? That's it.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, they
Mm.
published that. There was the first UK publication of that, I should say. I think it had been in the New Yorker, and then it was published there. So yes, it was called World Review, and it was very highly regarded, but was making no money. And so so my novel tells the story of a trip she makes in 1952 when the family was really on the brink of bankruptcy, to see about the possibility of a legacy that might have helped their family stay afloat. And when I learned about that episode in her life that very little was known about, I decided that I had to see if I could write a novel about it. So that's my story. That's how I came to Penelope Fitzgerald. And because I was terrified to write about a writer I admired so much, I looked for other examples of people who had done that. And that is when I found Anne's book, A Good Hard Look, and thought, oh, somebody's written about Flannery O'Connor. And so I read it, and I should give credit to Jenny Smith, who I think pointed me to it. In fact, my editor, my dear editor, who knew I was worried about this project, and she said, "Well, have you read this?" And it helped so much. So
that's very nice.
Thank you, Anne.
I have questions, but so I'll say I wrote about Flannery O'Connor very reluctantly. Like, I feel like I've been thinking lately about the idea of like whether you choose what you want to write about, and I don't feel that I do. Like, and it surrendering to that has been like really important for me as I went along. It means I'm not fighting my books. I surrender like immediately. But the two examples that I think of when I look at my work is I did not want to write a novel about Flannery O'Connor, like all the way through. I didn't want to. And then I did not want to write a book about a plane crash, which I did as the next book for Dear Edward. But like for me, it's like something shows up and there's reasons that it's there that I perhaps don't understand and that I perhaps don't like. But that's what I need. That's a story that I need to tell and that needs to be told by me. And so the sooner I give into that, the better. And when I started writing A Good Hard Look, which was took me 8 years to write.
8 years for this too. So what about?
Oh,
that's
really?
Funny, yeah. Same amount of time.
I gave birth to both of my children during the writing of A Good Hard Look, and each time I thought I'm going to finish this before this child is born. Both times I was wrong. But I thought initially when I started, I was writing about like a wealthy man named Melvin Whiteson who lived in New York City, who had lost his parents and had every opportunity, but didn't know what to do with it. And about a year into the writing it just wasn't working. And I was talking to my husband about it, and he was trying to be helpful, and I was not actually open to that. So he was talking, and I was looking over his head, and there was a bookshelf behind him, and on my eye fell on this big fat spine that was on the bookshelf, and it said The Habit of Being, which is a collection of Flannery O'Connor's letters that I had read 10 years earlier during college. And I just looked at it and thought, Flannery is supposed to be in this book. and then I spent like 2 years fighting that because
Yeah.
I'm from northern New Jersey. She's a southern literary icon. That's really was my big problem with it. I had never wanted to write historical fiction per se. I think it's hard
Right.
enough to make stuff up without actually having to then adhere to the realities of the world and real people. And then also, if someone's going to write about Flannery O'Connor, they should be from the South, and that seemed very clear to me. And one of my best writer friends, Helen Ellis, is from Alabama, and she was like, "Yes, you cannot write about Flannery O'Connor." So,
Well,
like,
that's encouraging.
yeah, it was like tough love, and I was like, I agree, and so I fought it and fought it. And then it took 8 years because if she was going to be in the book, then I could not write a mediocre book. I had to like raise the book to a
Right.
place where I felt like I wouldn't be embarrassed. I didn't think she would like that someone had written to her a novel, but I didn't want her to think it was terrible. Um,
Yes.
and so that's it. So it was actually, I learned so much writing this book. I had so many struggles. I changed my whole process while I was writing this book for the next one because of the struggles I had in this. But
And you did not have the family's support while you were writing, right? Which is very
no,
different from the
very different from
situation
you.
that I was in.
Yeah, part of it was that I had no chutzpah, and I was completely unknown. I had published one book that no one had read. So like I was embarrassed to reach out to her family directly. I reached out to the her home in Andalusia. At the time was a
Yes.
museum. It's not a museum now, right, Jenny? It's like something else now.
It's still a museum, but it's changed hands.
Yeah. So I reached out to the people who ran the museum and said that I was doing this, and they were just basically like, mm-hmm. And and then when I did my first reading, I did a reading at Andalusia. I was so nervous, and her remaining main relative, her aunt or great aunt, I believe it was like the sister of Regina, her mother, came to the reading and sat in the back of the room, and she was very old, and she had a beautiful ornate cane, and she just sat there glaring at me while I read, and then left before I was done. So no, they didn't, but they didn't. No one fought it either.
Right. Right.
So yes, very different than
Right.
your situation.
And I
Did you immediately reach out to
No,
family?
no. In fact, I didn't reach out at all.
Oh.
I rather naively thought that it didn't occur to me really. I began researching and I started writing, and I actually sold the book on the basis of a few chapters, and it was going well. I was writing quickly for me. I remember, I think I told my editor I'll have a draft in a year. I'm pretty sure it's just going really smoothly. And that was summer of 2020. And then that September, I got an email out of the blue from Terrence Dooley, who is the literary executor of the Penelope Fitzgerald estate. And the family had seen notice of the sale of the book. And he wrote to me to say the family is very interested and would like to be in touch. And I was terrified. I was just terrified.
So
I stopped writing completely. I put everything I had into my response to try to express to them what she meant to me, what her work had meant to me, what I hoped to do with the book. And I must have won them over because what happened is I ended up involved in a 5-year email correspondence with both Tina, her daughter, who she left behind on this trip to Mexico, who was 2 at the time.
I can't really get over the fact that she left her daughter behind. She brought
with family, but
she brought her 5-year-old son
yes,
on this trip and left her 2-year-old
and left the 2-year-old with family and was pregnant with her 3rd child at the time. So
that was rough.
I know. It was in 1952, traveling alone, a ship across the ocean, a Greyhound bus from New York all the way to northern Mexico. I mean, it was
a crazy thing to do.
A crazy thing to do. And so Tina and Valpy both invited me to ask questions about their mother.
And how old were they ish?
Let's see. They're in their 70s.
Okay.
Valpy is late 70s, I guess. Tina's mid. So I haven't met them. We have only ever emailed. I finally heard their voices only because when we were recording the audiobook, we needed some pronunciation advice. And so they made voice memos for me. So I've heard their voices only on voice memo.
Do they live in
I've
England?
yet to meet them. Yes. Tina lives in the Cotswolds and Valpy lives in Oxford and Spain.
Yep.
So I felt that they reached out to me and then turned out to be very interested and warm and, I guess, so what the next thing that happened was I had to start writing the book again. And I was engaged in this correspondence with them, but hadn't gone back into the narrative. And it was really only when I realized that I asked myself, as a lover of the novels of Penelope Fitzgerald, what kind of novel about Penelope Fitzgerald would I want to read? And I recognized that I would want to see these letters that I was getting from them, because they are so wonderful, and there's so much in their own voices. And really, as the letters unfold through the book, I've woven them into a narrative of the trip. They're sort of discovering things about their mother too, and asking questions, and so they end up reassessing why she may have gone. Valpy clearly thought that it was just a complete lark. There could never have been the possibility of a legacy, but it seems, yeah, as he learns, there was, we believe, a real possibility of a legacy. It was not a lark.
Yeah.
So I had to put the letters in the book, and it was when I did that.
Did you ask them that?
Well, so that's funny you should ask, because I put together, I don't know, 50 or 60 pages with the letters woven in, showed Ginny and my editor and my agent, and said, "What do you think of this?" And they liked it very much. And I said, "Great, I'm going to do it this way." And they said, "Now you do have permission to use the letters, right?" And I said, "No, I thought I'd finish and then ask them." And he said, "Oh, no. You need to ask right now." So that stopped everything again, all over.
Because then wouldn't you have to show them? Like,
well,
did
first,
they just say yes?
They said, yeah, I mean, it's kind of remarkable. Children of a novelist.
Yeah.
They,
Because also it could have been terrible, and then their letters are in it.
I know.
Believe
me,
it's not,
I know.
that wasn't in the cards. But if I were them, I would be like,
"No,
you're putting my
Anne.
letter into what?"
Yes. No, I described to them what I wanted to do. I wasn't finished with the book, so there wasn't anything to show them. I wasn't going to show them a partial manuscript.
No.
So I just proposed what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I think that they were compelled because so Penelope Fitzgerald wrote 9 novels, and the first 4 are very autobiographical, but the last 5 also are historical fiction and bring in historical figures and are a blend of fact and fiction. And I think they saw that I wanted to do something similar, and they said okay, and only asked that they see the final manuscript before it was published. And I agreed. We agreed, and then we all sat very, with hands clenched, waiting for their reaction. And
did they take a long time to read it?
They did not.
Good.
No,
it's nice.
I remember.
Very
Tina
nice.
read very quickly. Valpy made us wait a bit longer, but no, it was okay. Yeah, and they both liked it very much and have been really supportive. So.
I mean, what a wonderful gift to them. I mean,
yes.
Like,
I guess that's
you think,
true.
Of course, you imagine having like a novel written about your sort of, and she's clearly, you would see in the letters that Valpy and Tina write, Penelope Fitzgerald was very withholding in various ways, like not a sharer with her children. Like they would ask her questions and she would evade the answering.
Maybe is that a good time to just read?
Yes. Well, wait, let me say first, really great, wonderful thing, just so as you're reading the book, these letters are interspersed. They're at the end of some of the chapters, and you don't know as the reader, it says "Dear line," so you don't know who Valpy and Tina are writing to or whether this is real. And then it's only as you get to the end of the book that you realize that these are real and that they're writing to you. And it just adds this other really lovely layer.
Yes.
So yes, if you could read one of their letters, that would be wonderful.
I thought that might be a good time to do that.
Yeah.
We did think about that a lot, Ginny and I. We I could have said, because these letters were all written to me in response to questions I asked about the trip and their mother and their life. But I didn't want my name in the book. I just didn't.
I liked that you did it that way, because
so we went with the Russian dash sort of thing. That's what we called it. And so dear, I was so interested in your letter with its description of how you came to know my mother's work. Interested and also reassured, because I can see that you understand her and her life as far as one can ever know or understand other people's lives. I often wonder why I didn't ask her more about herself and decisions she made, and then I remember that she always evaded questions and never gave direct or detailed answers. My brother Valpy lives in a remote mountain village in Spain most of the year, though he also has a small townhouse in Oxford where he was a professor. He would like to get in touch to share his memories of the 1952 trip to Mexico, to Saltillo, not Fonseca. Thank you for telling us about Hopper. His Mexican paintings are so atmospheric, and you can feel the heat. I think the dividing line between fiction and fact is quite blurred in her biographies and her novels, so you push on. With all best wishes, Tina.
So nice.
Yeah. I printed out that last paragraph where she ends her so you push on, and I put that right above my computer.
That's so nice.
So it was the, it was a confidence builder,
Yeah.
which you did not have.
No, I had no confidence.
No. So that's very
Well,
hard.
it was very writing A Good Hard Luck was my hardest novel to write for sure. But like the very nice thing is like those letters are like this eruption of truth in this story that you're telling the story of something that actually happened in that Penelope Fitzgerald and her 5-year-old son did go to Mexico to hopefully win
Yes.
an inheritance. And but you don't have all the facts about that.
Right.
But so you have these but then you have these contemporary remembrances from these two children, and you have the letters that Penelope wrote. It seems that you have access to some of her and Desmond's. Is that letters, or did you make that up?
Those are all made up.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh.
We Tina told me that they would have corresponded. Is what
Yeah, she referenced
said.
at some point that
Yes,
they're
she
wonderful
said
letter writers.
that they were both
Oh.
wonderful letter writers, but I did not see any of those letters.
Oh, interesting.
In fact, I did go to her archive. So much of her archive is at the Ransom Center in Austin, Texas, and I went down there to look at her notebooks as I began work on this book. But those letters are not there. If they are available, the family has kept a lot of private correspondence, and then they've given some to the British Library. But I did not go to look at that, and those so the brief suggestion of a correspondence between the two of them is invented.
Oh,
Yeah.
I do love, well, and you reference in that, Valby references in that letter, Edward Hopper and his wife Jo, who were in,
Yes.
not Fonseca,
Saltillo, right?
Yes.
So
at the same time that Penelope was, and you don't know whether they crossed paths or
that's
not.
right.
But actually, it's one of my favorite parts of the book is this where Jo and Penelope become friends,
yes.
and you see this creative marriage between Jo and Edward, and it's a really nice foil for Penelope's marriage with Desmond, which is also a creative marriage.
Yes.
With its difficulties.
Well, it's so funny. You were saying earlier about looking at the book on the shelf of Flannery's letters and realizing she's part of the book. I have to put her in the book. That happened to me with Edward Hopper, because when I realized that I was researching Saltillo, the actual town where she went, in 1952, and learning that it was an artist center and painters and writers came there, often up from Mexico City because of the climate being more comfortable. And that the Hoppers so I learned the Hoppers had been there 3 times, twice in the 1940s, and the last time was the same winter that Penelope was there. So it is not known whether they met, but it seemed possible, especially because Penelope Fitzgerald was very astute about art. She was an amateur artist herself. One of her books, later she writes a biography of Edward Burne-Jones, the Pre-Raphaelite painter. So she was very knowledgeable about art, and she was always taking her children to museums, and so it's possible she would have sought him out. And I ran the idea by the family, and they said it's entirely possible. And then I thought, I have to put the Hoppers in this book, and I was really scared because I had just gotten the confidence to do Penelope, and now I had to do Edward and Jo.
Yeah.
But it's true what you say. It seemed to be too great an opportunity to have this double portrait of the two marriages. They were both. Jo was also a painter,
and so you read obviously about Jo and Edward.
So I read
Hopper.
all about them, and rather miraculously, maybe you all know that there was a great exhibit of Edward Hopper's painting, New York centric, but it had a lot about Jo in that exhibit, and how she kept track of all of his sales and kept track of all of his work, and her own artistic career really was subsumed to his in a quite tragic way, really. And so they were older. They would have been, when Penelope was in her 30s, and at this time they would have been in their 60s, late 60s. So there was a generational difference, but an artistic marriage. And they shared, Jo and Penelope. I like the idea of imagining a few weeks of friendship between them and what might have come of it.
Yeah, it was one of the loveliest parts of the book, certainly.
Thanks, Anne.
It's just there are so many different places that, because also I assume so you admired Penelope's writing since 1999.
Since 1999.
And then did you write it now because you read the essay where she talks about going to?
Yes.
Well, or did you always know you were going to write a novel about her?
Oh God, no. No. It was so she was my favorite writer. Hermione Lee writes a biography of her that came out in, I think, 2014. Great biography. She's a great English biographer, Virginia Woolf and Tom
Yeah.
Stoppard and others. So I read that, and the Mexico trip is mentioned. It has about a half a page, and but it did not strike me. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just mentioned that she does this, and I thought I read that and did not make note of the Mexico trip.
Mhm.
But in 2017, I read an essay by Lucy Scholes called The Peripatetic Penelope in Granta. And I remember where I was. I was at my kitchen table. It was the summer of 2017. And in that essay, it's Lucy who in that essay so vividly describes this crazy trip and how hard it would have been for a woman traveling alone in 1952 to take the Queen Mary third class ticket across the ocean, a Greyhound bus, all the way down from New York to Saltillo, pregnant, 3 months pregnant, with a 6-year-old in tow, 5-year-old in tow. And I just thought, wait, what? Wait a minute, hang on. And this is 25 years before she'll publish her first book. And so I got to thinking about how hard that trip must have been, and the long wait she had before she published, and
And
what
the
it might have
desperation
meant.
you would have to do that
Exactly.
trip. Like you just saw
Bingo.
no other options and wanted to
How
leave home.
desperate would you feel?
Yeah.
And so what would, right. Then that was enough to just, I thought,
Yeah.
oh, I'm fascinated. And then I went looking for more information about it. And there really is no more information.
Yeah.
There's just this essay she wrote in 1980 called Following the Plot, that Penelope Fitzgerald writes in 1980, an essay called Following the Plot, which is really a craft essay about plots and the way they work in novels. But she gives us about 3 paragraphs total, sort of setting the scene of this story, because she says, suppose I were to write a novel about a trip I made to Mexico 27 years ago with my son, then age 5. And she sets the scene of this house that she's visiting, these two women that have sort of summoned her at the suggestion that they don't have any heirs and they have this money to leave from a silver mine.
Such a weird thing to do anyway.
Yeah, I know, right?
So like scam written all over it.
I know. But sometimes I feel so strongly that I just followed the plot. I followed the bare, there are just maybe half a dozen details in that essay, the house, the pecan trees, the town Saltillo, which we do know was Saltillo. I mean, I can thank Hermione Lee and her good biographical research that she did indeed check the manifests of the Queen Mary, and they were on the ship. So we know she was in Saltillo, but she never referred to it as Saltillo. She only ever called it Fonseca when she spoke of it, and in that essay, Following the Plot. And what's interesting with that is that Fonseca is translated in Latin to roughly to dry well. So I think it was her own joke to herself about the trip and its outcome.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. So that's what drove you into the book.
Yes, it was that I have a friend who says I followed a biographer's path to the novel, because I went from the biography to an essay to reading Penelope's own essay about the trip, and then I wrote the novel. Yeah.
I love that in because all these people writing about all these other people, was the Valpy in one of his later letters in the book. He says that his own biographer, which because he's like a renowned economic Latin American scholar.
Yes, Latin American. His area of research is developing countries and I think issues around poverty. So his own biographer attributes his interest in those issues to this trip.
Yeah, which is so interesting too. Like he was shaped before he was even old enough to know that he was being shaped.
Right.
And Penelope Fitzgerald, in this wild act of sort of desperation and flailing, that she then never writes about
the book. No.
It's really.
And Tina becomes a Spanish teacher.
Oh, she is?
Yes. And her daughter.
The other one was a neurobiologist.
Yes,
right?
a neurobiologist. And do you know what her area of specialty is? How
like
pain,
I read it, but
how pain is transferred in utero.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like this trip just set so many paths on course in a strange way.
Yeah, so interesting.
And I think that's why, well, I mean, I was so compelled in the essay she writes that she obviously thought about using this material for a novel and didn't. And she says in that essay that she was sorry to let the plot go for what she thought was its natural energy. But, and I'm paraphrasing, but she said she never thought she could take it on for what were the far-reaching ramifications of the Mexican legacy. And I
Oh.
thought, well, what is there? What were the far-reaching ramifications? Why was she? I think she thought about the trip her whole life, but never used it for material
Hmm.
in her novels. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. And the ramifications are like in who her children became,
Yeah.
which wouldn't be what she was aware of at that time.
At that time, no,
Yeah.
no, but yeah.
My brain was just like, did she get pregnant on that trip? And she wasn't actually pregnant when she went, but she was pregnant before, right?
Yes, she was. She was. Which is a good way for me to ask you a question I had, because we talked a little bit this afternoon before the event, and we were talking about how there are ways in which Flannery O'Connor and Penelope Fitzgerald's writing, they have similarities, I
Mhm.
think, in the way they use in the way they see through social facades, and the way they use violence and in their narratives, and the way and love, I think the way love is handled. And well, I read an interview with you where you were sort of appalled when somebody suggested that you had introduced, like, the possibility of romance in
Oh,
your
yeah.
novel.
Yeah.
And you said, no, but it was a very sort of intellectual attraction. And I was facing the same dilemma, because I thought, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't, I
You did.
can't do this. I have to be very careful here. I do think it's possible to have an intellectual attraction to somebody, and I think she was far from home, and but in love with her husband too, but they were having problems, and so I had to step around all those issues
Yeah.
too. So I wondered if you would talk about how tricky that is.
Yeah, it's the same idea. I mean, I think what you did with Penelope is the same thing I did with Flannery, where I made sure that I kept to, like, in the span of years that I was writing that the book was set. She died in 1964, I think. So I think
Yeah.
the novel goes like 61 to 64 or something like that, 62 to 64. That the things that she did during those years are in the book. Like she took a trip to Lourdes that her
Exactly.
mother
Right.
took her on, with the hope that there would be a miracle and that her lupus would be cured. So Flannery goes to Lourdes in the novel.
Right.
But otherwise, she lives at home with her mother and the hundreds of birds they have on their farm. And
Peacocks.
yeah, and so I had Melvin and her become friends and are meaningful to each other, but I would never like have them kiss or anything like that. So I couldn't do that. Like, she still had to be recognizably Flannery. What was happening inside of Flannery,
Yeah.
I could imagine.
Yeah.
And emotional
Yeah.
tumult or indecision or questioning her faith, things like that. I felt comfortable writing, but not something that like crossed a line
Yeah.
where she had an affair with someone or something, because that
Yeah.
there's no there's no
Since we
facts that
have-
that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
I was thinking what's interesting. There's a couple interesting things about the between Flannery and Penelope. Um, oh yeah, that they're both quiet women. I mean, and Flannery is also an enormous letter writer. I mean, that's largely how she maintains friendships and relationships after she gets lupus, is she writes letters
Writes
every
letters.
afternoon.
Yes.
So I had that resource, when I was writing the book. But like that, they both took a trip. Flannery went to Lourdes. Penelope went to
Mhm.
Mexico. Obviously, they're both religious, and they have like a real faith that sort of transcends going to church or dogma.
Yes. Definitely.
And then I think it's interesting too that like Flannery died when she was 39. And because of her lupus, which she was diagnosed with like 11 years earlier, and she was only given like a year to live, and then she lived for another decade. But she had a very limited amount of energy every day. And I think she knew she was going to die. Her father had died of lupus, and she was like, I have to write, and I have to write now. And that is what I'm going to do. All of my life force and
Mhm.
the energy and my brain, everything's going into my work, because I know I don't have enough
Enough
time.
time.
And she couldn't marry, like she wasn't going to marry at that stage. So like as a woman, her personal life was curtailed, and her longevity was curtailed, but she was able to do her work. And
Yes.
Penelope, who married and had children, and a husband alcoholic husband,
Yes. So right.
he came back damaged from the war. I really love Desmond in the book. Like,
Yeah.
I find him
think
incredibly.
he must have been wonderful.
Yeah, he seemed
Yes.
wonderful, but like
but he
but
but
it was challenging
right.
their life, and so she didn't publish until she was 60 because she had to be done
Yeah, they
with
both
the work
had
of
their
yeah,
work was curtailed in
yeah,
different ways.
exactly,
Illness and
domesticity or
right,
like
yeah, and financial
yeah,
true
commitments,
financial catastrophe. I mean, they lived in council housing and they
yeah,
lived on a houseboat that sank.
yeah,
And they she Desmond was an alcoholic and lost his job and worse. I mean, there was some embezzling that had happened, but
mm,
because of money, needing money for the pub. So it was bad. It was
yeah,
very bad. And
yeah, yeah,
she kept the family afloat for 25 years
yeah,
and teaching English A levels and at another school. But right, she preserved her energy, I think,
yeah,
so that when she writes her first novel as Desmond is dying, as an entertainment for him, and then after he dies, she writes like the wind for the next 20 years until
mm,
she dies. She writes almost a book every other year for I think the next 20 years, and she dies in 2000. So
yeah,
she must have stored up her energy, and then Flannery used all of the energy she had in
yeah,
those years to write those 3 hours of every morning that
yeah,
she had.
yeah, and produced her a lifetime of work
Like, yeah, in
within
that way.
that decade. Yeah, I mean, I think they're both and intimidating women to write about. Um, I mean, I think Flannery's definitely intimidating, but what I
Yes.
read about Penelope too, she seemed like a very strong,
I think she was very
yeah,
strong-willed
yeah,
and hard to know.
hmm,
Um, Even her children said that
yeah,
she was hard to know. Um, there's a poignant moment where Tina writes to me that that she thought once she had children that she and her mother would share that,
oh,
and I think actually that Penelope was a pretty good grandmother in once the children were born, and when she was there, she was present, she helped, but when Tina was pregnant, she thought she'd share a lot of that with her mother, and they never spoke about any of the physical aspects of being.
mm,
So I think she held on to a very Victorian way of being
yeah.
somehow, and she didn't talk about details and
Well, that's very of the time as well.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that women didn't speak about anything bodily.
No,
I
right.
mean, my mother got her period and thought she was dying because
Mhm.
she had never been told that there was a period
Oh,
or anything.
wow.
So she thought she was bleeding out. But that's like
Oh
completely
no.
normal. Like her
Yeah,
mother
that
wouldn't tell her.
wouldn't tell her, right? You don't talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's oh, oh,
And then
bad
you keep
things
it to
have.
yourself and die quietly, which is, I think, what she was intending to do. I mean, well, I thought it was interesting too that like one of the possible explanations for why Penelope never wrote about it was that she had taken all the notes on it in a red notebook that sank when she was living on a houseboat.
Well, yes, and that's an invention of mine,
Oh, it is.
it is well,
See, it's so interesting. I,
but
like,
based on, but like you, I mean, I kept myself to the facts I had, and she did like red notebooks.
yeah,
She did tend to use red notebooks, which I saw when I was in Austin at the Ransom Center. The houseboat did sink.
mm,
They lived for a few years on the houseboat Grace along the Thames. Actually, that the most autobiographical novel of that time is Offshore, the one I
mm,
read first, and that is loosely based on the years that they were there, and um, and it did sink, and they did lose lots of papers and lots of notes. So it's
mm,
again, it's possible, but we don't, but it's not known that
yeah,
she actually had notes toward a Mexican novel that were
yeah, yeah,
lost.
yeah.
She did write one short story called "Our Lives Are Only Lent to Us" that was
Hmm.
published after her death. In the only short story collection, "Means for Escape," was published after her death, and in that collection is this story, which is set in a place that is like Fonseca a little
Hmm.
bit, and um, I I think, and again, this is just my theory, but I think that is the only time she tried to fictionalize what happened in Mexico or what
Uh,
she observed in Mexico, where it's a story about the two cultures misunderstanding each other. It's a Irish expat community in northern Mexico, and it's you have the Mexican nationals and you have the Irish expats, and you see them misunderstanding each other, and what she wrote so well, and even better than in this story in her novels when she wrote them, is misunderstanding. I think she was a great writer about misunderstanding and the comedy and the tragedy that is inherent in
mm,
that. And so in many ways I laid my story over her story, and kept to, assuming that these were things she observed and she put into a story. I borrowed them for the novel. But that is,
Oh, I love that.
yeah. But anyway, I don't
Should
know.
we open it up to?
Should we open it?
Yes.
Maybe, is that a good place to?
Yeah. Well, actually, there's one line. So you have a lovely line towards the end of
Yeah.
the book that I think Penelope's in some kind of a fictional back and forth with a bank teller.
Oh,
Is it?
yes,
Yes.
in her head. The
Yes,
bank, the
in her
bank
head.
manager.
Yes, and
in
so
her
the
head.
bank manager says. So they're talking about her trip. She's talking about her trip basically, and he says, "Would you agree it was a treasure hunt that became a mystery that turned into a love story?" And it's true. Like it has all those elements, and it is all of those things. And it's a treasure hunt for the reader too, because
Aw.
of the letters and trying to pick out, and then like Edward and Joe Hopper, showing up. It's just like you've created this sort of multi-layered picture of this year, basically,
Yeah.
in this life that is both imagined and known and speculated on and
Yes.
remembered. Yeah, it's really magical.
Thanks, Anne.
If any of you guys have any questions for
Yeah.
the rest, please.
We could ask. We have questions now.
What does it mean to re-release a book?
Yeah, good question. it means well, I'm in the strange position where both of my first two novels have been re-released now. My first novel, which came out in 2004, was re-released last year, and that one had gone out of print, so it kind of made sense. Nobody could get it if they wanted to. So the woman who painted the cover for Hello Beautiful painted a cover for Within Arm's Reach, and it was re-released. And then A Good Hard Look, no one really who has read my other books knows that it exists. So it seemed to make sense to re-release it. And Jessica Miller, who painted the other covers, painted this beautiful peacock for it. So it's really just sort of putting it in the world again for the readers who didn't know it ever existed at all.
And now Anne's books also together look like a set. They look like they belong together, and it's amazing. It's lovely.
I'm very
You
lucky.
have your own. I don't want to use this
Aesthetic.
word. That is it.
Oh,
I was going to say
well.
brand, but I'm so tired of that
Oh,
word,
yeah,
and it's so
no,
much better than a brand. You have
yeah.
your own aesthetic,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, it's really Jessica
love
Miller's
it.
aesthetic, but I am happy to glom onto it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a wonderful artist, and I'm really lucky. So yes, and there's some new material in the back of it. There's an interview that I did back at the time with my friend Hannah Tinty, and an essay that I wrote, and a reader's guide, a recipe from Flannery O'Connor for some kind of chiffon pie.
I love that.
So yes, there's
Oh,
like
and
extras in it.
There's this great. I have to read. I'm
Oh.
going to read this quote from Anne because it's so.
But it's not me.
Well, it's not you, but
Yeah.
Okay, it's true. But
Well,
you.
no, just
but
qualify that I didn't make this up.
Right. This is in this. This is actually Flannery O'Connor, but we were discussing this ahead of the event because it is how we feel, but it's such a challenge. And so in this conversation, it's Anne and Hannah Tinty speaking, and they're talking about how much they love this quote from Flannery O'Connor. So this is Flannery O'Connor writing. It's one thing to write about short stories and another thing to talk about writing them. And I hope you realize that you're asking me to talk about short story writing is like asking a fish to lecture on swimming. The more stories I write, the more mysterious I find the process, and the less I find myself capable of analyzing it.
Yeah.
So,
which is really true. When you finish a book, when I finish a book, I have no idea what it's about. I don't know what the themes are. Other people tell me what they see it in, and I'm like, oh gosh, that's so interesting. And then like you learn enough about it that you can go out and talk to people and be like, well, I think that this leads to this, but I didn't know that initially. Yeah. So and if you try to keep talking about it more and more, you just end up thinking, what am I doing? Like,
right.
This isn't making any sense.
It's getting worse.
Yeah. Like you're supposed to be an expert on something that you completely made up and that you don't understand. And then you're going out as if as if you understand it. And also you're like an introvert who doesn't know how to talk in front of people, and you add all that together and people are like, and you're like, I'm doing my best here.
I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
I'll ask a question.
Yes.
And this is probably an entirely unfair question after the quote that you just read. But
Oh, thank you very much.
both of you, because both of these writers are so iconic and they have such distinctive styles on the page and such distinctive rhythms on the page. to what extent did you have the rhythm of their writing in your head when you were particularly crafting them as characters?
Wait, we're supposed to repeat. I remembered.
Oh, right. So the question is, to what extent were we thinking about the rhythms and stylistic or characteristics of the writing of Penelope Fitzgerald and Flannery O'Connor as we were writing our novels? And I'll go first.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is a really good hard question. um, I I think that I knew immediately that it would be a terrible mistake to try to do any sort of imitation or impersonation of her. But at the same time, I knew that I wanted to try to capture the sensibility of her and the way she would be thinking and sound and the person who would later go on to write the books that she wrote that do sound so characteristic of her. So the way I think the way I did that, even though I wasn't aware that this is what I was doing at the time, is I created this document I called The Lines, and I reread the novels in order that she wrote them. And as I read, I transcribed into this document every sentence that struck me as having some sort of clue to it in it to me that I saw. Again, based on all the research I'd done and based on the knowing her biography as well as I could. So, maybe an autobiographical tidbit or maybe a characteristic of her style, just something that was just the essence of her. And I made this document with all these sentences. And so it was this scaffolding, it was this structure that means nothing to anybody but me. But I think it was what, in doing that, I think I got the sensibility in my head, so that when I began, then, well, I was doing this simultaneously with writing, but I think the work of doing that helped the writing, so that I'm happy to say that even Tina, her daughter, read it and said to me, somehow you have managed to sound both like my mother and entirely like yourself. I don't know how you
Oh,
did it, but I was
that's
captivated.
amazing.
She wrote that after she read it. So
Wow.
so that was all I could have hoped for, honestly.
Yes. So Flannery has written all these letters that are published, and then so I really look at it as like, and I read her letters in college, and I had been Flannery's fiction is so it's like shakes you by the lapels. It's like you don't curl up with Flannery O'Connor and like read a Flannery O'Connor story. You're like on your feet, like sweating while you read them. And she's not my favorite writer. I'm incredibly admiring of her. Like she's absolutely one of the best short story writers to ever live. But it's not to my taste. I don't know. It's not. It roughs me up too much. Um, so, but her letters, when they were assigned to me when I was a senior in college, and in her letters, I got to know her, and she is incredibly generous and kind and hilarious, and paints a picture for her friends of life on the farm with her mother and all the peacocks that she collects and peahen and quail and like crazy land that she surrounds herself with,
Yeah.
these noisy birds, and describing her friends and everything. And so when I was writing the book, I couldn't reside in the land of Flannery's fiction. I could never write like that, and I wouldn't try to, but I could try to get her humor and her sarcasm and her the hard line she took with people. She did not suffer fools, and she would tell you to your face. So like that is the woman that I tried to put in the novel.
From her letters.
Yeah, not her
Yeah.
writing per se, but like the way that she spoke
Mhm.
was very clear in her letters. Thank you, Jenny.
How do you know when a book is done?
I don't think it is. I've actually made some editorial changes in pencil in the first chapter as I've been reading to audiences. I can show you. I've edited. Sorry. You trust other people. I think you get to a place where you know you're ready to share it with other people, and then I don't know. I mean, I do think that left alone with a manuscript long enough, I would edit it out of existence. I mean, I tend to reduce. I want to get to the essence, and I have nothing extraneous. And I do feel like I just let them tell me, no, that it's done, because otherwise I would just keep editing.
I do think you can feel like a kind of momentum coming. I can feel a kind of momentum coming. Like right now, I'm working on a new. I'm writing like what I think is the last 100 pages of a new book, and I do feel the story shift into a different gear. Like the emotional charge from everything that's come before it is like tingles through all the sentences in the best case scenario. But that's for me like the last section. Like for when I finished Hello Beautiful, my husband doesn't. I have two friends who read all my drafts, and that's amazing. And then my husband really doesn't know what I'm working on. He knows I'm working on a novel, but he doesn't. We don't talk about it. He wouldn't remember. So, but he reads it when I think it's done. And when he read Hello Beautiful, it actually ended in the penultimate chapter. And he got to the end and said, "No, I need more. Like, we have to see what happens between these people. I need one more chapter." And I was like, "No, it's going to be too cheesy." And he said, "Just write it for me." And so I wrote the chapter for him. And then I was like, "God damn it, this is better." So that ended up being the last chapter, but I wouldn't have written it. So like, you really do need the people around you.
That's a great story.
One more question.
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
Did you edit the letters at all, or rearrange them, or fictionize them in any way?
The letters are 99% as they were written to me. I did not change their language at all. I took things out, and I didn't include some letters. So I chose the letters I wanted, and then of those letters, I shortened them in some instances. But largely as written to me. And which I wanted to do it that way. And then they very much, well, Tina again was kind of looser about it. Valpy very much wanted them to not be edited. And at one point I think I did inadvertently change something, and he noted it and he put it back. Yeah, so yes, but they are their voices, yeah, as they wrote to me.
I hope you get to like read in front of them someday.
Oh, I do too.
That would be
I just
lovely.
want to meet them. Actually, I don't know if I want to read in front of them, but I would like to meet them.
Yeah.
I hope that happens. Yeah. Oh, all right.
Is that okay?
All right.
Okay,
Yes,
one more.
one
Yes,
more.
Yes.
So when you're done, and I'm thinking of you, Jessica, because our kids are now off to school, and is finishing a book. Do you feel like an empty nest?
Oh.
Kind of?
Oh.
And what do you like? Are you thinking about the next thing, or are you
Ideally.
like, "Oh my God, I'm so glad when I'm finished," and
You
could do something else?
Well, I wonder how Anne feels. I think there is something similar to it. You, although not so much now. I mean, I finished this book a year ago, and it's been in production, and the process of bringing it into the world is really its own thing. So, but a year ago, when I was done, and we, what is it? You transmit into the production department, and that's it. There is a kind of grief. You miss it. Like, you've been so in that space, and the characters are so in your head, and then suddenly you're done with them. And it's weird. I don't want to say you miss them. That isn't quite right, but I did feel a little bereft, and kind of at a loss. And you always hope to have other things you're working on, and I do, but they're at various stages, and there's nothing quite like being like actually where you are right now. I mean, that's the best.
It
To
is
be
the
100
best.
pages from the end of a new novel is just that's the best. I'm not there, so it is hard. Yeah, it's hard. But then you throw yourself into bringing it out into the world, which is a different kind of hard. And you try to just keep some new work going, so that you remember why you're doing this. And yeah, how about you? Do you miss?
Oh, I get so sad when I
Yeah.
hand it in.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually like the worst. There's like 2 months where I'm like the saddest I get. I
Yeah.
don't see, like, it's like this whole world inside of you goes dark, and I don't have another idea yet. It takes me like 2 to 3 months to have a new idea for the next thing. And until then, it's like I'm hanging on by my fingertips. It's so
Yeah.
unfortunate. I keep hoping to improve that part of the process, and maybe I will.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous of writers that like I interviewed Kevin Wilson a couple months ago for his new book, and he
What did he say?
he writes he's like a chain smoker. He can't, like, there's just no lag.
There's
And
no
I think it's
lag.
like a mental health thing for him too. But he writes, each of his books is inspired by one sentence in the previous book. So like
Really?
he's teed it up. Yeah.
You're kidding.
Yeah. Isn't that
Have you-
interesting?
Have you tried that?
I know. I wish. I can't. I wish. I think I
Oh,
would just rewrite the same
fascinating.
book. There has to be
Yeah,
a
no,
break for me.
it's, yeah,
Yeah. But it's hard. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Jessica and Aaron, for celebrating with us. If you're still listening to the live stream, you can buy copies of the book from the link in the description. If you're here, you can buy copies of the book at the register when you checked in. Jessica and Anne are also going to be signing up there. We're going to have one of them at this little drop-down desk, and the other one we're going to move this library cart, and going to be there. And so you should go buy 10 copies.
Dear.
Baby books. And that is all. Have a great night. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the marigolds. I have to, what a nice, they're the